All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for bearing with us through some technology difficulties. We are welcoming Frank Sachs this morning. He is from the Apple Valley, Minnesota area. He is here this morning to talk to us about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in 1962. Larry came up and told me he was 10 years old when this took place, and he remembers that.
63.
63, sorry. So you were 9? 11? Yeah. So this is a very interesting topic and we can't wait to hear about it. Please silence your cell phones if you have them with you or turn them off. And that way there's no interruptions, and we're going to get started, and he's going to talk a little history with us this morning. So thank you and welcome.
Can you hear me without that, or do I need this too?
Probably use that.
All right, so I've got multiple plug-ins here. This is really very exciting. It's good to be back with you. As she said, my name is Frank Sachs. I spent 40 plus years in the classroom, teaching, guidance, counseling, and when I retired, or when I call it got rewired, I got started asked to speak about things, and so now I do that pretty much full time. I've been doing it the last 6 years, and I've been out here with you before, and I talk about either topics that I taught or things that interest me. And in this case, this is a topic that interests me, and I'm sorry the screen isn't going to fit exactly, but it's more important that you listen. This is often referred to, okay, let's see if we can get this to work. No? Okay. 13 days that really could have changed the world for much worse than it did. In terms of preparing for this, I read the book 13 Days by Robert Kennedy more than once, which really got me quite interested in this topic as a young man, having witnessed it, as did many of you, in person. Then I've listened to several podcasts, seen some documentaries, and I'm glad to share it all with you. So, it starts here. Like every origin story, it starts somewhere before. Anybody know what we're looking at? We're looking at the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what the atomic bomb did in World War II is it ended World War II. And it established us, the United States, as the world's first nuclear power. And at that point in time, we are the most powerful nation in the world. And how long did we remain the sole nuclear power? Not long, because we were being spied on. And almost immediately, the Soviet Union stole the secrets. In fact, even when Truman's telling Stalin about it, he's in the process of stealing the secrets. They had a spy within the Manhattan Project. His name was Julius Rosenberg, and he connected with a man by the name of David Greenglass, and they stole the implosion design. And by 1949, 4 years later, we are no longer the sole nuclear power in the world. Russia also has an atomic weapon. And interestingly enough, that's followed almost immediately by 3 other countries becoming nuclear powers. Great Britain and France, who were our allies, and China, which was allying with the Soviet Union. Do you think they discovered this on their own, or did maybe we shared the information with them? Regardless, the world had a club of 5 nuclear powers. Now, the Cold War got its name. Anybody know the gentleman down here on the bottom? Winston Churchill. Absolutely correct. Anybody know where Churchill's preparing to speak? Fulton, Missouri, Westminster College. You see, Churchill the British people said thank you to him by voting him out of office. And Truman, who had gotten along very well with him, invited him to come to the United States and make a speech about how things were in the world. And Truman gave a speech which became known as the Iron Curtain speech. What was the Iron Curtain? That was the divide between Western democracies and Soviet principalities, correct? And Churchill identifies that. And he also calls this something. He calls it a Cold War. Not a hot war, it's a Cold War. And he says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended upon the continent. Please excuse my British accent. And he captures the imagination of the world, and he's named it, and it marks a turning point in the emergence of the Cold War being between East and West. And the speech emphasized the need for European and American cooperation to counter this threat. If we aren't having a Cold War, we're going to have a hot war. And Truman decides we have to face this. And he creates something became known as the Truman Doctrine, but we had a different name for it. We called it containment. And what did containment mean? Who are we containing? No, not ourselves. We want to spread democracy. We're containing who? The Soviet Union and the spread of their autocracy. And we have to provide this with three strategic plans. One is political. We have to ascend in that arena. One is military. We have to be able to face them because we do not keep as large an active military. And economic assistance. And it's not just for Americans, it's for the free world. And what this does is this changes America's world outlook. Prior to World War II, America may have been active on the world stage, but as soon as it's done, it returned to isolationism. Isolationism means what? We do our own thing, don't bother us. But now, all of a sudden, we're going to have to work with other nations. And Truman creates some, okay. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay. Truman's creating some very interesting programming. Still doesn't work here, though. He's got political. What we were afraid of was something called the domino theory. Anybody remember the domino theory? Anybody played dominoes as a kid? You line them up, and you can get them all in a line. If you push one over, what happens? They all fall down. And that was the theory that if one nation fell to the communists, all the nations next to it would fall to the communists. That got us in trouble in Southeast Asia. Military defenses. We're going to be stronger if we're together than separate. So Truman oversees the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, 17 nations to begin with. But basically all are agreeing to assist one another if they're in war. And finally, Europe is a mess. The nations we have defeated are a mess economically. And Americans do something no other nation did when it won a war. We're going to help you rebuild your society. Russia stole everything they could that what East Germans had and took it back to Russia. We're saying, how can we help you rebuild your society? Who are two of our greatest friends in the world today? Germany and Japan. And that's because we chose not to treat them as a defeated enemy, but as a defeated soon-to-be friend and colleague. And that's different in warfare throughout the history of the world. And in 1948, Truman does something else. He recognizes the independence of Israel. And now we have a democracy in the Middle East. And the first big challenge that he meets is in 1948 and 49. Anybody remember this? I'd be impressed if you did. It was called the Berlin Airlift. Stalin decided he wanted the West out of Berlin. Berlin is inside East Germany. They divided Germany into 4 sections. We put 3 of them together, the French, the British, and the American. They also divided Berlin into 4 sections. We put 3 of them together. Our 3 became West Berlin, his became East Berlin. What's happening is that everybody who wants out of East Germany went to Berlin and walked across into West Berlin and left. So much so that at the point that they would build the wall, how many people are leaving West Germany every single day through Berlin? 1,000 people. And they aren't just coming from East Germany, they're coming from Austria, Yugoslavia. They're all trying to enter the Western world. And Stalin says, I want you out. And the Americans say no. And he says, well, I can cut off your drinking water. I can cut off your highways. I can cut off your railroads. Guess what you won't be able to do? You aren't going to be able to heat your homes, you're not going to be able to drink water, and you're not going to be able to make your food. So either pull out or I'm going to make Berliners suffer. How did we respond? We responded with something called the Berlin Airlift. And we got together with Great Britain and we discovered something. There were 5 airports in West Germany, and there were 3 airports in Berlin. And if we could fly supplies in, we could keep Berlin alive. But we had to bring in water and food and fuel to keep their heating up. So how often did we have to have a flight land and take off in Berlin to make this happen at its peak? How many an hour do you suppose? How many times? You got a guess? It's okay to guess.
6.
10, 6. Take 6 and multiply it by 10, and what do you get?
60.
60, once a minute. At the height, once a minute. Remember, they're taking off from 8 airports and they're landing in 3, and they're literally being turned around. They said it couldn't be done, and after 11 months, the Soviets said enough already and reopened the highways and the waterways, and the city stayed alive, and it became a symbol of Western democracy. And the Cold War begins to heat up, and it emerges in the 50s. And these 2 people on the bottom were principal participants. Anybody know who they are? Khrushchev and Nixon, and behind him is Brezhnev off to the right, if you notice. But first, 1950 to 53, we have a proxy war, the Korean War. We think we're fighting the Soviets. We're really fighting the Chinese as well. But we stand up to communism. We stop it from spreading. Then in Hungary, the Hungarian people are revolting. They want to be free, and the Soviets crush that. We get all these refugees coming to the United States. And then the Soviets say, you founded NATO, we're going to found the Warsaw Pact. We're going to have our group, which will commit to, if we get attacked, attack you in a group. So now the Cold War is really heating up. And then in 1957, the unthinkable happened. The Soviets did what? Sputnik. What's Sputnik? The first satellite. All of a sudden, the Soviets have put a satellite. How soon before they put weapons on that satellite? Not only that, the second time they sent up a satellite, what did they send in it? A dog. Yes. Poor dog, he's still up there somewhere. I don't know how the kibble's holding up. But you had a dog, and then you had a man. They put the first man in space. What was his name? Yuri Gagarin. But the space race is on. We are feeling threatened. We're going to put money into science. And then in 1959, Castro kicks out the dictator in Cuba and seizes control. He's a left-leaning revolutionary, and we, because of so many U.S. interests taking it on the nose, we choose not to play nice with him. I think we could have maybe turned him into an ally, but we kind of don't because of something that's going to happen. Ike is very concerned about it, and the CIA comes to him and they say, we have a plan to take Cuba back. We need to train Cuban refugees to invade Cuba. Do you know what that was called? Bay of Pigs. Absolutely. This group knows a lot. I'm impressed. But first, we get a new president, a new young president. You can see him off there in the corner. And his inauguration speech inspires the nation. He says, we dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. What revolution is he talking about? Our revolution. The first revolution that was over an idea, not because of disparity of wealth, which is what most revolutions are over. Let the word go forth from this time and place, of friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed, and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of our liberty. He's inspiring. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness and sincerity is subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. And then Kennedy doesn't take his own advice. The CIA comes to him and say, Eisenhower signed off on this invasion of Cuba. We've got these men trained. They're exiles. We can take Cuba and we'll take it in 5 days. And Kennedy says, what's required of us and our military? And they say nothing. They figured once they invaded, Kennedy would sign off on air support, and that's how they would win. Kennedy says, you can go ahead with the invasion, but we're not committing U.S. troops at any point. They invade Cuba, and they are defeated. We don't take it in 5 days. They're defeated in about 5 hours. We did not account for the fact that it was a poorly planned invasion. It lacked the support in the U.S., but it also, we underestimated Castro's military strength and the Cuban people's support for a new regime. And we have egg on our face. It's a huge disaster and a huge defeat for the U.S. Kennedy is brand new, and what's he going to do? He holds a press conference and he says the following. Does he point fingers and put blame on anybody? No. Kennedy takes full responsibility for the Bay of Pigs and says the following. Victory has 1,000 fathers. Defeat is an orphan. Today I am an orphan. And Kennedy knows he's got a chance. It's coming up very quickly. In June of 1961, he's going to Vienna and he's going to meet with Nikita Khrushchev. He thinks because he's charismatic and charming, Khrushchev will do what? Fall in love with him like everybody else and do exactly what he wanted. But Khrushchev sees JFK as weak and an inexperienced leader, and he beats him up verbally. He says, at the end of their meetings, he not only looked anxious, but deeply upset, and I had clearly overwhelmed him. Khrushchev basically said, this guy was, Ike was nothing, and this guy was less. They don't have a very good respect for Kennedy. Kennedy leaves mortified. Khrushchev leaves overconfident. What's the problem when you're overconfident? You can be setting yourself up for what? Yeah, for defeat, for an upset. Believing he has the upper hand, Khrushchev hardens his positions in the Cold War. Kennedy leaves humiliated. He wanted compromise, but in the end, he says, he beat the hell out of me. There was one interesting thing that happens. The summit touches on nuclear proliferation, and Khrushchev accuses the U.S. of creating a hotbed of war. And there was some truth to this. We are dropping bombs in the Pacific on islands and creating larger and larger bombs to the point we drop a bomb on something called Johnson Island and we destroy the entire island with a hydrogen bomb. Boom, no longer exists. But the other thing that's interesting is, and we can't quite see it here, these people have dinner together like 3 different times and have a social together. And every time they're together, Khrushchev insists that he be put next to her at dinner and whenever they're anywhere. Who's he insisting he be next to? Jackie Kennedy. He is, look at that face, he's smitten. Totally smitten with Jackie Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy sees that, but Jackie is talking to him about, we need to do something about this nuclear proliferation. She gets in Khrushchev's ear, and he's totally enamored with her, charmed by her. But he wants to continue to show strength. He demands Kennedy withdraw everything, all the West from Berlin, and Kennedy, in his only moment of strength, says no. So Khrushchev is going to plan to do that anyway. and he's going to allow the East Germans to build a wall. Why do you build walls?
Keep people out.
To keep people out, unless you're building the wall,
Keep people in.
which is only used to keep people prisoner. So we aren't building a wall. This isn't Hadrian's Wall, the Great Wall of China, to keep people out. They're building a wall to keep people in. And Kennedy says, well, it's a hell of a lot better than a war, suggesting it was less destructive than a full-scale war. It's a fortified barrier. It's used to keep people in. They're losing 1,000 people a day from East Berlin to West Berlin, so that one day they assured us they weren't thinking of planting a wall, and 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning, they woke up and found out what? Overnight, they put the wall up. Initially barbed wire, and then they start the concrete structures. That's a whole other speech for another day. But Kennedy says, well, a wall is better than a war. Maybe there'll be some cooling off, but he realizes right away he's got to make a point about this. He's going to have to go to Berlin. He's going to have to make a speech. He's going to have to reassure people. And he delivers a speech, becomes known as the Ich bin ein Berliner speech, meaning I am a Berliner. Kennedy wants this speech to echo the speech by the Romans 2,000 years before, when they said, civis Romus sum, I am a Roman citizen. He wants to say, I am a Berliner. There's only one problem with this. Kennedy had an accent. Anybody know that? And every time he tried to say, Ich bin ein Berliner, he couldn't say it correctly. And so they took it out of his speech and he put it back in. And they fly over the Atlantic and he's practicing with his speech coach. And he can't get it right. He's saying it, and instead of saying, I am a Berliner, he's saying, I am a jelly donut. Because of his accent. And there are some people that say that's what he said, but the Berliners understood what he meant. And he says something like, all free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner. And Kennedy has now turned the wall into a symbol of the Cold War. We stand for openness, an open society. They stand for a closed society. And now we're ready to talk about what comes next. The Cuban Missile Crisis. It's October 1963, 63, 62? When's Kennedy shot? 63, so 63. It's Monday, October 15th. There's something called a U-2 high-level reconnaissance plane, and they've taken photographs of Cuba, and they have discovered something rather significant. Russians are installing in Cuba missile bases. Every one of those red dots is a missile base. At first, we think they can't possibly be active. And that's the assumption we will go on for days. Guess what? They were already active. They could have been detonated right there. So it's day one, October 16th. The next 13 days would mark the most dangerous period in world history. Kennedy creates an executive committee to consider America's options. The principals on that committee are in charge of foreign policy and national defense, and they're briefed on everything that they have discovered. Discussions will be on how to respond to the challenge. Quickly, they decide there are two courses of action to consider. Ready for this? An airstrike followed by an invasion, or a naval blockade, quite possibly followed by an invasion. But they're both acts of war, which means we will be doing a first strike. And they don't want this to go public, so Kennedy keeps his official schedule. He goes off on campaign events, etc. Day 2. American military units begin to move to the southeastern United States in case we have to invade. And intelligence photos show there aren't just 16 sites, there are 32 sites that the Soviets are installing missiles in. We thought 16 was bad. 32 is twice as bad. Kennedy keeps his schedule. He meets with the Crown Prince of Libya. He visits Connecticut for a political event. And we identify the first 3 SS-5 IRBM sites. SS-5 IRBM sites are ballistic missiles that are medium or intermediate range. To give you an idea of what that means, the only place in the United States that that missile could not hit that came from those sites would be where? Alaska, right? And they think Seattle was outside the range, but that's it. Everything else in the 48 lower states would be fair game, including us in Minneapolis. Remember how they told us to get under our desks and cover our heads and that would protect you? Okay. Kennedy happened to have a meeting scheduled pre-discovery with Andrei Gromyko, who was the Soviet foreign minister. He knows this is happening, and he confronts him and says, you know, we won't stand for any missiles in Cuba. And Gromyko lies through his teeth and says, we would never do that. Just like the Japanese said, we don't plan to attack Pearl Harbor as they're attacking Pearl Harbor. That's what people thought about. Kennedy says, if we find missiles in Cuba, there will be the gravest consequences. Recognize, Kennedy got beat up on Bay of Pigs. He got beat up in Vienna. But he's learning. He's discovering that if you have a bully, what's the best way to deal with a bully? Stand up to a bully. So he's not going to give in here. And it's a warning, yes. And he deliberately approves setting off this megaton hydrogen bomb over Johnson Island as a demonstration to the Soviets of, this is what you're playing with. This is the kind of bombs we could drop on the Soviet Union. And Kennedy calls his advisors together, and he asks, what should we do? Invade or have a blockade? And they discuss these two big questions, and the military action is going to be either one of 3 choices: limited airstrike, full-on airstrike, blockade. Now, the head of the Air Force, it was a guy named Curtis LeMay. Anybody remember his nickname? Bombs away LeMay. Guess what he's calling for? Now, just let me turn the Air Force loose, this problem will be over. Bombs away. Kennedy, to his point in time, says maybe we should do some political action first. So he's got this whole group meeting. He takes a vote. How many people think we should go to war right now? How many people think we should try a political solution first? How many voted for a strike? All but 2. Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, and General Taylor, the head of the Joint Military Command, are the only 2 that say no, try something political first. Kennedy knows what he's been gotten into with the Bay of Pigs, says no, we're going to try something political first. We'll keep the airstrike in our back pocket. Here's the group that's on this committee, and it's the who's who of American politics and military at the time, including Dean Rusk and Ted Sorensen and Lyndon Johnson and Robert McNamara and Robert Kennedy and all the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Here's what they look like meeting, and there's the Joint Chiefs of Staff off on the right, and the man to Kennedy's left is bombs away Curtis LeMay. Kennedy keeps his schedule, but he's finding it difficult to be away from these meetings. So he goes to Ohio and Illinois, and then he returns and says, they're recommending a surprise attack. I have to be there for the discussions. And he calls his press secretary and says, tell everybody I've got a bad cold. And they said, but you don't have a cold. And he says, tell everybody I have a bad cold. And the press secretary, Pierre Salinger, says, don't I get to decide anything? And Kennedy says, yes, you can decide how bad my cold is when you tell him about it. And Kennedy comes back, and they go into a 5-hour meeting. It's basically a marathon. And after 5 hours, he makes a decision. We're going to go with the blockade. But a blockade is a military action. So they hit upon the idea of calling it something else. Anybody remember this? We're going to quarantine Cuba. What are quarantines used for? To keep people out because it's dangerous, because you might catch smallpox or typhus or diphtheria. Quarantines were used to protect people. Kennedy's going to use semantics. And he orders Ted Sorensen to draw up a speech, and he goes off to church the next day, and then he sends a letter to Khrushchev. And in this letter, he demands the Soviet dismantle the missile bases that they've already constructed, remove all offensive weapons, and that they would not allow any further ships to enter Cuba if they are carrying offensive weapons. Kennedy wakes up the next morning, day 7. He calls Hoover, he calls Eisenhower, he calls Truman, and assesses them on what the situation is like. Prior to addressing the American people, he sends a personal note to Khrushchev. Remember, there's no red phone in the White House where they can talk to each other. They've got to send messages back and forth by transatlantic cable because there's no satellites, so no cell phone calls, nothing. It's basically letters. He sends a letter to Khrushchev demanding they get out of this, and he says, I have not assumed that you or any other sane man would in this nuclear age deliberately plunge the world into war, which it is crystal clear no country could win, and which can only result in the catastrophic consequences to the whole world, including you, the aggressor. And then Kennedy says, go to DEFCON 3. DEFCON 3 is the second highest level before warfare. We've been at DEFCON 3 like twice in our history. DEFCON 2 means attack is imminent. Will we get to DEFCON 2? Stay tuned. So, would you all like to see Kennedy's speech? Rhetorical question. Yes, you're going to see Kennedy's speech.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba.
So Gromyko's lying to him. He's going to say this in a nice way, but he's lying.
Training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. Acting therefore in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine of all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
What did you notice about Kennedy?
He's appealing to their sense of the world and what's going to happen to the world.
Well, and he's also, he's telling him, you lied to us, we know you lied to us, and if you attack any part of the United States or other parts of America, it's going to be seen as an attack on the United States. And Kennedy had gone out and done something rather remarkable. He had asked them to call a meeting of the Organization of American States, all of North and South America and Central America, with the exception of Cuba, and they voted unanimously to support the United States. When was the last time that happened? But they knew how crucial this was. Now, a number of things are going to happen. The UN is going to start talking about this, and Kennedy is going to send his brother to meet with the Soviet ambassador, and they're going to actually start talking about the fact that there should be some way to clear this up. And Khrushchev's ships, Soviet ships, are being stopped in front of Cuba and holding in the water, but every ship has a submarine following them, which couldn't have been very happy for the Soviets and the submarines. Couldn't have been good for the Soviets and their submarines, because they had no air conditioning in their submarines. So whenever they were underwater, the temperature got to about 115 degrees. So they're very concerned that somebody's going to do something accidental. It's going to fire in front of a ship and accidentally hit it. They're going to, submarine's going to fire on an American ship. They're very worried that this is going to happen accidentally and take us into World War III. And Kennedy makes his speech overnight. People take notice of this. People are very much afraid. And Khrushchev responds to Kennedy's letter indignantly. He says, "How dare you call this a quarantine? You're sending us an ultimatum. You're threatening the world. Consider what you're saying." Khrushchev is responding as he did in Vienna. He's angry and he's yelling. And what did Kennedy do in Vienna when Khrushchev got angry and yelled at him? Backed off. Retreated. Kennedy's not about to back off or retreat this time. He says, "You are no longer appealing to reason, but you wish to intimidate us." Knowing some missiles in Cuba are now operational, Kennedy drafts another personal letter to Khrushchev. Rather than react to his anger, he tries to react with reason. And U Tant, the Secretary General of the UN, says, "Let's have a cooling off period." And Kennedy rejects it because he says a cooling off period leaves those missiles in Cuba pointed at us. And he takes the country to DEFCON 2. That means the slightest provocation and we're at war. And not just a little war, a world war with nuclear weapons. Then at the UN, there's a face-off. We have the courteous U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confront his Soviet counterpart, and he says, "Admit it, you've placed active nuclear weapons in Cuba." And the ambassador tries to blow Stevenson off, and Stevenson says, "I am prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over," and then produces the photographic evidence of what he's proving and gets the Soviet to admit that they have done this. So, I have that clip to play for you as well. Hold on. And this is a fun clip of Adlai Stevenson. Okay.
And while we're asking questions, let me ask you why your government, your foreign minister, deliberately, cynically deceived us about the nuclear buildup in Cuba. And finally, the other day, Mr. Zorin, I remind you that you didn't deny the existence of these weapons. Instead, we heard that they had suddenly become defensive weapons. But today, again, if I heard you correctly, you now say they don't exist, or that we haven't proved they exist. With another fine flood of rhetorical scorn. All right, sir, let me ask you one simple question. Do you Ambassador Zorin deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sights in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
Я не нахожусь в американском суде, и поэтому не хочу отвечать на вопрос, который задается в прокурорском плане.
Put to me in the fashion in which prosecutor does. In due course, so you will have your
We're in
reply.
a court of world opinion right now, and you can answer yes or no. You have denied that they exist. I want to know if I've understood you correctly.
I should like to
Продолжайте
say,
вашу речь, господин Стивенсон.
Sir, will you please continue your statement? You will have your answer in due course.
Stevenson, would you continue your statement, please? You will receive the answer in due course. Do not worry.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room, which you can all examine at your leisure. Shows 3 successive photographic enlargements of another missile base of the same type in the area of San Cristobal. These enlarged photographs clearly show 6 of these missiles on trailers and 3 erectors. And that is only one example of the first type of ballistic missile installation in Cuba.
So you get an idea of what diplomacy was like back then. Stevenson has taken it to Cuba, and now Cuba is to the Soviets in Cuba, and they get a letter from Khrushchev. It's a long, rambling letter. They think he may have been drinking when he wrote it. But he proposes the following. We'll remove the missiles if the United States does 2 things. Promises never to invade Cuba, and second, will take nuclear missiles out of Turkey that are pointed at the Soviet Union, which, by the way, we were scheduling to remove anyway. But what we didn't know is that Castro had sent Khrushchev a letter saying, it's time to stop fooling around with this. Let us conduct a first strike on the United States. Let us send these nuclear missiles at them now before they come and take them out here. Castro proposed a first strike against the United States. And I think that's why Khrushchev is drinking late at night and proposing this issue, because he all of a sudden realizes this is very, very critical, not just for the Soviet Union, but for the world. And, you know, they got to see what took place at the UN, because the whole world saw that. He knows this is on Russia. So then it almost falls apart. That morning, on day 12, a U.S. officer is shot down over Cuba and killed. And the military want to strike. And Kennedy calls the widow and says, this is an awful thing to ask of you, but I'm going to ask you for the good of the country to accept this death and hold it in, because the fate of the whole world could result on it. And she does. He gets the Medal of Honor for that. Meanwhile, they get another letter from Khrushchev. This time, he ignores everything he said in the first letter. He's making unreasonable demands and extreme threats. And Kennedy's going, What do we believe? And he goes to his committee and they make an amazing decision. They decide, let's accept Khrushchev's first letter with the peace plan and act like the second letter never even arrived. And he sends Bobby Kennedy off to meet with Dobrynin, and they talk about it, and Dobrynin says, we want two things. We want the promise never to invade Cuba, and we want a promise that you'll remove the missiles from Turkey. Kennedy calls his brother. His brother says, yes, I'll do it, even though the military say no. And he says, but you can't make it public. We'll just announce that we're going to remove them 6 months later. And the Soviets agree. And the next thing you know, the crisis is officially over. Later that day, on a speech in Moscow radio, Khrushchev announces dismantling of the Soviet missiles, that they'll be removed, and that the U.S. will promise to stay, never to invade Cuba, and 6 months later, we do pull the missiles out of Turkey. By the way, Turkey to Moscow is almost the same distance as Cuba to Washington, D.C. So we had nuclear missiles facing the Soviets. So the question here becomes, would killing Russians in Cuba have led to World War III? Most likely, yes. But Kennedy didn't listen. He decided for himself he was using the lessons of the Bay of Pigs, Vienna, and the Berlin Wall to show more restraint, but also strength. Having survived the Cuban Missile Crisis, Americans are now confident about the country and Kennedy. 82% thinks American power has been increased in 1963. 63% thought the West could achieve a working relationship with the Soviets. 56% thought he handled it well. But the thing that gets me is Kennedy's popularity rating. It's October 1963. He has a 70% popularity rating. Who has a 70% popularity rating as president? Kennedy did. And of course, everybody knows what happens next. Dallas, Texas, 1963, November 22nd. And that's all, folks. Thank you. Questions?
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.